is doing so well. But we had a liberal court hand down a very shocking ruling, basically saying that the country... Let me ask you a question. Do you remember the chaos just a few months ago around what was called Liberation Day? Yes, that day when Trump announced tariffs left and right on practically the entire world. Almost every country except places like Russia and Belarus. I'm sure you all remember it.
Yes.
Stock markets plunged, fears of a global recession skyrocketed, and suddenly almost every country in the world rushed to strike deals to ease those tariffs. Well, what if I told you that all of that, or at least a big part of those trade penalties, might actually be illegal and could disappear? Pay close attention to what comes next. If immigration and drugs are the spearhead of his security policies, tariffs are the banner of Donald Trump's economic policy. Thanks to them, the president claims to have already brought in hundreds of billions of dollars in investments and tax revenue. Without tariffs, and without the trillions of dollars we've already collected, our country would be completely destroyed, and our military power would be wiped out instantly. Of course, the real numbers are nowhere near that high. Tariffs are indeed real, and yes, they're no small matter. But you know how this administration works? They eat one and count 20. According to Treasury Department data, annual revenue actually falls somewhere between $300 and $500 billion, still nearly 4 times higher than previous tariff collections. But what if I told you that even this might soon vanish? Yes, no joke. Despite all the fanfare and Trump's campaign boasting, a court decision could blow up his flagship economic policy, one of the main pillars of his second term. On August 29th, Trump suffered one of the toughest legal setbacks imaginable. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit ruled by a 7-4 vote that many of his global tariffs are illegal. That's right, crystal clear and unequivocal. And this isn't even the first ruling in this direction. Trump's administration had appealed an earlier decision by the U.S. Court of International Trade, hoping the higher court would side with them, but instead they doubled down, essentially saying Trump's tariff campaign is a legal farce. The reason? According to the ruling, the law he used to impose these tariffs, International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, doesn't give the president such authority, no matter how much he thinks he can act unilaterally. Trump and his team argue that trade deficits threaten national security. That's why they tried to justify the tariffs by declaring a national emergency, something the judges dismissed as nothing more than a political ploy. From the court's perspective, tariffs are simply taxes. And who has the constitutional power to raise taxes? Bingo, the Congress. In other words, Trump overstepped. And keep in mind, this wasn't his only blow that week. A judge also ruled his deployment of troops in Los Angeles illegal. Another court struck down his cuts to Harvard's funding as unconstitutional. All of this happened in the span of just 1 week. So, what's the White House's strategy? Appeal, of course, and hope friendlier courts will eventually side with them. Tariffs are trickier. Here we're not just talking about an abuse of power, we're talking about sidestepping Congress itself. The Court of Appeals even stated that the administration's expansive interpretation of IEEP violates the Supreme Court's major questions doctrine. Now, what on earth is that? Despite the odd name, it's a crucial legal principle. It says that if a policy involves massive sums of money and can reshape the entire economy, the president cannot act alone. Congress must approve it. This is the same doctrine that led the Supreme Court to strike down Joe Biden's plan to forgive hundreds of billions in student loans. And now Trump could face the same fate. The next step? The Supreme Court itself? Once they weigh in, that's the end of the road. The stakes couldn't be higher. Tariffs affect about $2.3 trillion worth of imports, nearly 70% of all foreign purchases by the U.S. So naturally, many of you are wondering, okay, so does this mean Trump's tariffs are over? Unfortunately, not so fast. There are 2 reasons why this fight has only just begun. Not all tariffs were struck down, only those imposed using IEEPA. The rest, like those targeting Canada, China, Mexico, or on products like steel, aluminum, and copper, remain in place. Even the tariffs ruled illegal will stay in effect at least until October. Because the appeals court gave Trump time to escalate the case to the Supreme Court, which is exactly what he did. This is where the real battle begins. The Supreme Court has recently been rubber-stamping nearly everything Trump pushes, often with increasingly creative justifications. That's why the White House is optimistic they'll do the same with tariffs. So, we're left with 2 possible scenarios. Scenario 1. The Supreme Court upholds. Trump's tariffs a very plausible outcome given recent trends, though it would cast a shadow over the court's credibility. Scenario 2. The court strikes down Trump's flagship policy, wiping out his tariffs entirely. Not only that, but the government would also have to refund all previously collected tariffs with interest. If that happens, Trump's only option would be to seek congressional approval, which is unlikely as elections draw nearer. Such a ruling could blow up not only his economic agenda, but also his foreign policy, which largely relies on tariff threats and economic blackmail. So the big question, could Trump be on the verge of the biggest failure of his political career? Let's break it down. The Supreme Court factor. The Supreme Court is made up of 9 justices, 6 conservative-leaning and 3 progressive-leaning. Thanks largely to Trump's 3 appointments during his first term, add to that 2 justices ideologically close to Trump, Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas, and you can see how tilted the court is. Justice positions are lifelong, so this balance won't change anytime soon. For Trump, the court has become a kind of red button. Whenever a lower court strikes down one of his policies, he pushes it tan more often than not. The Supreme Court fixes it for him, often through the so-called shadow docket, traditionally reserved for emergencies like imminent executions or natural disasters. Under Trump, it's become a fast track for validating his agenda. Deportations, mass layoffs, expanded presidential powers, you name it. The problem is that the IEEPA was never designed for this. It was created to allow targeted sanctions against hostile foreign actors, not to let presidents impose sweeping tariffs. For nearly 50 years, no president dared to stretch it this far. Ironically, Congress passed the law to limit executive economic power, not expand it, and now courts are saying Trump crossed the line. Still, given the Supreme Court's track record, many expect them to eventually side with Trump. But if for once they don't, then Trump's economic master plan could collapse. Why it matters politically, tariffs are central to Trump's promises. Cut the federal deficit. Eliminate income tax entirely. Yes, he's floated the idea of abolishing income tax funding the government solely through tariffs. But the math doesn't work. Tariffs make up just 2.7% of federal revenue, compared to $2.4 trillion collected from income taxes in 2024. Even at an optimistic $500 billion a year, tariffs would cover only a fraction of the gap. If tariffs are struck down, the economy won't collapse. In fact, growth projections might even improve. The real blow would be political. Trump would lose his favorite weapon for pressuring allies and adversaries alike. Refund demands from businesses could also trigger a fiscal headache. Internationally, deals with the EU, Japan, and South Korea could unravel if tariffs are deemed illegal. At home, the precedent would be huge. Allowing a president to use emergency powers to impose economic policies without Congress would be a dangerous expansion of executive authority. In short, everything now hangs on 9 justices. Will Trump get his way again? Should a president have unlimited powers? What happens if his signature policy is struck down? That's the debate now.